and we've got a lot of things to talk about. I'll give you some of my reviews of recent Netflix material. We'll review a book about Star Wars, and we'll talk about Facebook and the Oculus Go and the future of VR. And of course, we also, I think, need to discuss the recent death of two great people from the movie world. One, an actor, Ian Holmes, and another one, one of the most famous music directors and writers, Ennio Morricone. If you want to join the conversation, feel free to leave a comment to jump in. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them. And you can just say hello so that I know that you're watching, and let us know where you're watching from, and if this is your first time or not. Anyway, back behind me you see the backdrop of the Millennium Falcon for today. I don't know why. I just fancied I'd like a Star Wars background. And we've got HK Nate Mon Games and Royal Calzone. I like that name. That sounds like a pizza. Lawrence is there, and Ello, and Tobias, and Macy. Hello, hello, hello. So good for you to, so good to see you, and thanks for joining me. And we've got Professor Slughorn. It isn't Ian Holm. Oh, okay. What did I say? Ian Holm or Ian Holmes? I haven't started to record yet, so it was Holm, right? Yeah. Maybe I got confused with Sherlock Holmes. All right. And we've got some viewers from Australia. Wow. You're up early. Hello from Poland. Dzień dobry. And Apalacer is from Guatemala. We've got a really wide variety of people from all over the world. Excellent. Argentina. Bienvenido. And Ireland. That is great. So let me triple check. Ian Holm, right? He is it Ian or Ian? I never know. I guess it's Ian. Oh well, I'm Dutch, what do I know? Oh, it's already midnight in Australia. Wow. That is a mind warp. Yeah, you guys are way ahead of us. But so good of you to jump in. I will waste no more of your time. Let's get this show on the road, and off the ground. Hey, Mike. So let's start the show. Hello and welcome back to another episode of my weekly show, almost weekly. I have to say that last week I was so busy that I just couldn't squeeze it in. But I'll make it up to you with a full-fledged, lock and loaded show with tons of things to talk about. As always, this episode is brought to you thanks to my patrons, and I've got a whole bunch of recent patrons that I want to quickly mention here to thank them for their ongoing support. If you want to join that community, that growing community of patrons, and help me to build these shows and do the masses on Sunday, and currently on my wish list, I have new lights because I'm finally in my, let's say, my more definitive studio setup. But what I still don't have are proper lights for the camera here for everything that I'm streaming. So I'm eyeing these Elgato lights, these key lights, but they're pretty expensive. They're $200 a piece, and I think I need two. So that is why I hope that you want to support me and help me sometimes procure material like this. Everything you see and hear has been made possible thanks to my patrons. So a big thank you to Agnes, AM Spence, I should say, Andrew, Carlos, Carol, John, Joseph, Laura, Matt, Melissa, Nadine, Oliver, Patty, Paul, Roel, Rob, Robert, and another Robert, and Sandra, and Sean, and Sebastian, and Stephanie, Stefan, Suzanne, Teresa, Thomas, and Vanessa. Thank you so much. I'm not using your last names because of, privacy reasons, but you know who you are. You know that you're a patron. And as a thank you, I record another show, which is very similar to this one, but totally different topics. At the end of this episode, I will mention the things that I will talk about this week in Father Roderick to the Max. So that is one perk that I give you in return for your ongoing support, and that is a little extra hour to listen to if you want. All right, let's get going.
Do you know what's going on? This is what's happening in your world.
Face it, Catholics rule. We got Boston, South America, the good part of Ireland, and we're making serious inroads in Mozambique, baby.
You've taken your first step into a larger world.
Well, it's been a bit of a sad couple of weeks because of people from the movie industry, or that we know from the movies, died, unfortunately. First, it was Ian Holm, an actor that I know from several of my favorite movies. Of course, his most recent work, I think it's one of the last movies that he actually played in, was The Hobbit. He was already at an advanced age when he shot the scenes for that, so they were shot on green screen. He never went back to the set in Matamata, which he did for The Lord of the Rings, but they used a stand-in actor. But everything else was filmed in a set, I suppose, in London, somewhere in the studios there. And he already had, he was already suffering from Parkinson's disease, which ultimately was the reason of his death. But of course, he wasn't only known for his contribution to the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit saga. The first time that I saw him in a movie was in the movie Alien, which I saw in theaters, but it was a long time ago. I don't even remember. Maybe I was still in high school or perhaps already in seminary. I'm not sure. But he was that android, and it's a huge reveal. Hopefully I'm not spoiling it for anyone who hasn't seen the movie yet, but hey, it's an old movie. But he's one of the more likable characters in the movie Alien, and then towards the end, it turns out that he wasn't human at all. He was actually an android. A very memorable role. I still see that scene with the prosthetics, and you have this white kind of milky blood that spills out of his severed head, and even androids became victims of that horrible monster on board. The Nostromo, I think, was the Nostromo. And that was the first time that I saw him on screen. But he also plays a role that is maybe not as well known. He plays a trainer in Chariots of Fire, which is an excellent movie from, I think, 1980 or something like that, 1981. And he is also a pretty important character in a very funny, very weird, but also delightful science fiction movie called The Fifth Element, where he plays Father Vito Cornelius, some kind of monk / priest-like figure who tries to protect the universe against evil. And in order to do that, he needs the 4 elements and the 5th one that is bringing them all together. And he's great in that movie as well. Very, very different from his other roles. So he will be definitely missed. I'm so glad that they could bring him back for The Hobbit, even though you could tell that they used a lot of probably prosthetics and makeup, and maybe even some digital wizardry to make him look kind of the same age as the Bilbo that we knew from The Lord of the Rings, which of course was filmed, 15 years earlier, maybe even longer. So you could still tell that they had, touched him up a little bit. But his voice was the same, and it was just great to see him. It was just wonderful that they could film a prequel with actors many years after they filmed the actual sequel, The Lord of the Rings. Also, just recently died Ennio Morricone, the most famous film composer, I think, next to John Williams. And he actually has been around making film music even longer than John Williams. A very kind, religious man, a very faithful Catholic, or at least a very convinced Catholic, who also in his later years found a lot of solace in his faith. What didn't this guy compose? I mean, all the famous movie themes for as long as I've been to the movies. He was just a staple of the Hollywood box offices, from the theme in The Godfather to some of these westerns. My favorite music, and I'm pretty sure I'm not alone, is the soundtrack that he created for the movie The Mission with Jeremy Irons. That is the first time that I cried because of the music in a movie. The music was so intense and unlike anything I'd ever heard before, in combination with a very raw, emotional story. I remember seeing this movie when I was in seminary, and hearing that music, it literally helped me it strengthened my vocation. I wanted to be a missionary. I wanted to be, just giving my life to Christ and even risking my life for Christ if necessary. And it was this combination of a great story, amazing cinematography, and this heavenly music. The mission theme, with the oboe, is one of the most beautiful pieces of music ever written. So, again, someone who will be greatly missed. And since we're already talking about the world of movies and TV shows, it is a very easy segue to the section of my show that is dedicated to movies and TV shows. This time I won't be talking about movies, theater movies, theatrical releases, but of a number of TV shows that I saw on Netflix, and maybe you too want to check them out because, well, I think they were pretty interesting.
How do you not like movies?
They're predictable. Like, the guy gets the girl, and that kid sees dead people, and Darth Vader is Luke's father.
Not liking movies is like not liking puppies.
They're fine. I just get bored and never make it to the end.
You need a movie education. You need a movication. Now I'm gonna give it to you.
So this week, the news broke that they had finally traced and arrested Ghislaine Maxwell, the associate of Jeffrey Epstein, convicted pedophile and abuser who died in prison before he got judged or sentenced of an apparent suicide. The accomplice, or Ghislaine Maxwell, was a daughter of the very well-known Maxwell media mogul from the UK, is accused of having helped Jeffrey trace down or find victims, and also to facilitate the abuse in a very insidious way. I've watched the documentary series on Netflix called Filthy Rich, and it chronicles the story of the victims that have come forward of the abuse by Jeffrey Epstein, and it also gives a a very good, interesting, informative backdrop of how this guy got to where he was and amassed the power and the wealth that made him think that he was invincible, that no one could catch him, until, of course, reality kicked in and he did get caught. And once he was imprisoned, many new victims came forward, and you hear a lot of their stories in this documentary series. It is a very difficult series to watch. The descriptions are very graphic because the abuse was very graphic. And when you see these women that are coming forward and telling their stories, you constantly have to keep in mind that when they were abused, they were as young as 13 years old, 14, 15. Now they're women whose lives have been tainted and in some cases even almost destroyed by the abuse that took place over many years. And Epstein was a serial abuser. He abused maybe hundreds and hundreds of girls, only a fraction of which have come forward to tell their story. And Ghislaine Maxwell played both the role of the recruiter, so she was looking for vulnerable girls. Often they try to find girls and children that were already in a difficult situation or had been abused before. And this is something that you often see in these abuser stories, that they have this almost evil sense of finding the most vulnerable victims and to hurt them even more, as if their pain wasn't enough. And Ghislaine, being a woman, also facilitated the abuse by making the girls at first feel at ease. You know, what can go wrong? There's this woman here is clearly, this Epstein's girlfriend, and she initiated the abuse, which kind of creates this psychological weird, closed environment where, and if you hear the stories, it is unimaginable how clever this whole scheme was set up to break down the resistance, to change, to make everything shift in terms of morality. And then they would even enlist girls so the victims, to find out other victims. That is even more evil. So you turn victims into perpetrators, or at least accomplices. And that made them, because they were accomplices of Epstein, made it even harder for them to go to the police and tell what happened. So it's mind-boggling what evil happened and how much apparently power and wealth can completely pervert people. What makes the whole situation even more explosive is that Epstein made a lot of friends in powerful circles. From Bill Clinton to Donald Trump to Prince, what's his name, from the UK, millionaires, business people, lawyers. There were so many people that were, I think, blinded by his wealth, by the character that he played of being this very kind, benevolent man. Surely he can't do anything wrong. And of course, the big question is, how much did these people know? We've heard all the stories from, a guy like Kevin Spacey. And this whole avalanche of accusations that ended his film career and his TV career. He was a good friend, a personal friend of Jeffrey Epstein for years, and this is the case also for many other wealthy, powerful people and people that are in the limelight. So it's going to be interesting to see what Ghislaine will tell, if she will collaborate with the FBI and maybe tell her side of the story, or maybe try to strike a deal, reduce her sentence for information, things like that. Whatever the legal process will be, what you can't repair is the damage that has been done to so many women, and I'm thinking mostly of the women that have not dared to come forward, or maybe who killed themselves, or live in shame and have to carry the weight of the abuse all by themselves. I hope that this new arrest, which is in many ways for the victims very important, because Epstein is dead and they cannot face him anymore. I remember, and it's also shown in the documentary in the final episode, that the judge actually allowed these women to still tell their story after Epstein died, which is kind of very uncommon, because someone who is dead, you can't judge him anymore, you can't hear him. But he made room for the story, for the stories of these young women, which was already a huge consolation for some, and a moment where they felt empowered. I hope that this process of Ghislaine Maxwell will give the remaining victims another occasion to come forward and to seek help and to find support, but that it may also maybe lead to another confrontation in front of a judge with the victims and this accomplice. And in certain ways also, not just an accomplice, as someone who initiated the abuse, who was participating just as much as Jeffrey Epstein in this horrible crimes. But a very interesting, albeit shocking and dark documentary, but very well done, with limited means, of course, because the only stories that they could tell were the stories of the victims, most important stories. But visually, of course, they did have a little bit of material and photos with Jeffrey Epstein, but of course they couldn't interview many people that were part of that inner circle of Epstein, because no one, of course, wants to be on TV associated with this guy. But nevertheless, I think they did a very good job, and maybe they will make another episode once the story develops. But it's interesting that this series premiered on Netflix. So, and that just a few weeks later, they finally found Ghislaine Maxwell and arrested her. The second thing that I watched, the second series, I'm still watching it on Netflix, is the series called Transfers. It is a science fiction drama made in France with French actors. It is, it's pretty well done. It's very well acted. It tells the story of a future where people can switch bodies. So it's the kind of the idea that you also see in the Matrix, where you can, but in the Matrix it's in a virtual world. But you can just, take any shape or form. They can transplant your memories and your identity in whatever virtual body. You see it with the movie Blade Runner, or the universe of Blade Runner, where a lot of the clones are pre-programmed with false memories, just to give them a sense of identity and a personality, but it's not theirs. Here it's even worse. You can just if you're rich, you can pick any body you like. So you may be 85 years old and suffering of all sorts of diseases, but you can just, take out your identity, your soul, maybe, although the series doesn't go into metaphysics, but whatever, is your core programming, and just put it in a younger body and then live another 100 years. The poor are not so lucky. They get assigned new bodies. And so there are some harrowing scenes in the beginning where you see that a child, I think, was about to die from a disease, and then the government just planted her identity into the body of an old lady. And so you see these parents facing this girl in the body of an 80-year-old, and they're distraught, and it feels so wrong. And so there is a lot of societal backlash against this process of transferring to other bodies. It is also illegal in some situations. And then there is, murder and mayhem, and there's a detective story. It's a very interesting concept. It's very well executed. The gripe that I have with this series is the way in which the Catholic Church is depicted, because in the world of the series, the Catholic Church has gone almost completely digital. So instead of going to a church and seeing a priest, you just click a button on your screen and you press the confession button, and then a good-looking, Hollywood-like priest with a glowing Roman color, all fancy, appears in the middle of your screen, and I will now hear your confession. And it has a bit of a Max Headroom vibe to it. It's like, is this a real person, or is this a digital recreation of a priest? And then the confession that they film is so immoral, and the priest gives such bad advice, and just, it's like, this is so the opposite of what a priest should say in this situation, and basically just goes along with the sins of the person and affirming that person. So it's almost as if confession has turned into some kind of psychological affirmation exercise, instead of you confronting your sins and asking for forgiveness and making amends and having the firm determination to not sin again. In this case, it's the priest that's just, well, go ahead, you did the right thing. And no, she did not. Oh boy. And it's really a caricature, and you wonder, are they serious? Is this, it looks so ignorant, the way they portray priests. And it's so cliche, but in the worst way imaginable. It's like, feels like lazy writing. It's like you could just completely take out the religious element, and it doesn't add anything to the story other than, making the Catholic Church look ridiculous. And, well, if you need, sometimes people ask me in the chat, why doesn't the church allow long-distance confession? Why can't I just have a Skype call with a priest? Well, watch this series, and you'll know why. You'll know why the Catholic Church will never allow that, and will insist that confession is to be a personal meeting with a priest and is a physical event, and digital forms, even though they may be very well intentioned, but they could lead to very terrible situations. Not to mention, of course, one of the most important reasons is the protection of the person who wants to confess, the protection of the privacy, the safety that is necessary. It's actually essential. The secrecy of the seal of confession is essential to the process. If you could have the idea that maybe someone is listening in, or the things that we currently witness with social media, with TikTok, all the security problems with TikTok and it leaking information to China. All these big companies, Facebook, Google, gathering the incredibly detailed information, know more about you than your own mom and dad. and maybe know more about you than you know about yourself. All this is, I think, a very good reason for the church to be extremely careful with allowing confession to take place digitally, because if you're not safe, how can you truly reveal your heart? It is you make yourself, during the sacrament of confession, incredibly vulnerable. So the priest needs to be a defensor, needs to be a knight, and needs to protect it with his life. Priests would give their life to protect the seal of secrecy of confession, because of the person confessing, because you want to protect the dignity and the integrity of the people that are seeking forgiveness and make themselves vulnerable in the process. Anyway, yeah, and then of course there are some adult scenes in there. There is a scene, I think it's in the 3rd episode. Yeah, not for everyone. Anyway, and then finally, something totally different. I started watching the Last Airbender animated series again. I've got the Blu-ray box, which is amazing because they, for many years, you could only get the series on DVD. And I think the episodes were aired in 4:3, but they were sampled in a very low resolution. Even for DVD, it looked very blurry and did not do justice to the quality of the animation and the colors and everything. So they issued a couple of years ago a Blu-ray box, and the quality is amazing. It's a difference of day and night with the old DVD version. On Netflix, they still have the low resolution, the DVD SD version. Although I've heard that in the United States, they've already switched to the Blu-ray quality, or at least the HD version. I'm watching it on Blu-ray, and this is the first time that I finally got beyond the first 3 episodes. For some reason, I never followed through. I got stuck somewhere at the end of the 2nd episode. And I don't know why. The story didn't grab me that much. But now I'm so totally in it, and it is amazing. It's such a great series. And of course, you know that they are working on a live action version of the series with the original creators involved. So this is going to be very different from the super disappointing movie. One of the worst movies ever, The Last Airbender. Don't watch that movie. It is so lackluster in almost every aspect. But hopefully the real life action series will be good quality. They can't disappoint the fans another time. But the animated series is amazing. And lo and behold, I was watching the end credits of the episodes, which I always do on Blu-ray, and I noticed that a couple of episodes, the first and the 2nd episode, and then some other episodes of the 1st season, have been directed by none other than the great Dave Filoni, that we all know from Star Wars, The Clone Wars. Dave Filoni is a master storyteller, and I only knew him from Star Wars. And it turns out that he even did a lot of pre-production work for Avatar: The Last Airbender. So he's been very actively involved in this series, which I had no idea. But you can see the master's hand, and one of the reasons that series is so good is probably because people like him being involved. So a huge thumbs up for The Last Airbender so far. I can't wait to see where they will take season 2 and 3. From what I've heard, it's even going to be better than season 1.
Catholics rock!
Here at the Peculiar Bunch, we're always happy to tell you everything you always wanted to know about Catholics, but you were afraid to ask.
Catholics can be a peculiar bunch. No meat on Friday.
Oh, meat? What do they eat? Light bulbs?
Today I want to answer a question that was asked in the Discord community, which is available to all those of you that are supporting me through Patreon.
Man, you guys got more crazy rules than Blockbuster Video.
So in case you didn't know, if you become a patron, and that starts at, I think, $2.50 per month, or something like that, you get automatically access to a Discord server, which is a kind of a community app, which is amazing. And it's used a lot in YouTube, for YouTube communities, for streamers, gamers. It's free. You can just install the client and join small communities. It's very different from WhatsApp or Messenger or even applications like Slack. It's much more multimedia oriented. You can even, if you have a channel yourself, you can stream straight to your Discord community. And when I heard about it, it was the Patreon offered a very easy integration with the Discord system, so that if someone becomes a patron, automatically gets access to the Discord server community. Samuel Varg from Sweden has recorded a short how-to for those of you that are already patrons and haven't figured out how to get access to the Discord server. And in my show, Father Roderick to the Max, which I record for my patrons, I will play that little audio tutorial, which makes it really easy to join. One of the things that I like about the Discord community is that we have various sections. So we can talk about Star Wars, or we can talk about faith, we can talk about games, general chat, and we can create even more, like sub topics in that community, and so there is a faith section where I ask my patrons if they have a question for the Peculiar Bunch, then they can type it there, and I can read through it and try to answer those questions. So a very interesting question that came about in the faith section was, what about yoga? And let me see if I can find the specific question that was asked. It was asked by Jessica, and she writes, I came across a BBC News item on the Greek Orthodox Church's stand on yoga. According to this BBC item, the Greek Church advises Christians to shun yoga. The Orthodox Synod made the ruling after Greeks were encouraged to practice yoga during quarantine. So this was, the Orthodox Synod kind of pushing back to this I suppose, advice that was given, I don't know, maybe by the government in Greece or something like that. They said, no, don't do it, it's dangerous. Now, Jessica wants to know, should I rethink my yoga practice, which I use for mental and physical health and not for religious purposes? Old RPGer says, I read a bit on this. As you would expect, there are a spectrum of opinions. Samuel said, just body positions and breathing methods cannot be bad by themselves. Old RPGer writes, I think Samuel is right. As long as the practice is not religious, you should be okay. That's my opinion as a layman, not as a theologian. I think a lot of people fear the practice could lead one away from the church to Eastern religion. I don't see it like that. Then Samuel mentions that in Sweden there is a Christianized version of yoga called tikva, where all the Eastern religious words and phrases have been exchanged for Bible quotes and words for God. Instead of bowing to the sun, you bow to God, who is the source of all light, etc. So the distinction that is made by the people on Discord is the right one. Yes, yoga involves a lot of physical techniques and postures and breathing techniques. And all that, of course, in itself cannot do you any harm. On the contrary, it may help you calm down. You may have some clear benefits, mental benefits, physical benefits from practicing these yoga stances. But what many people in the Western world don't understand is that yoga in the Oriental world is intrinsically linked with also a world vision and, in a certain way, a philosophical or even a religious vision, which is incompatible with Christian faith. There is no other way to put it. And if you would follow yoga practices as a spiritual journey towards enlightenment, for instance, then you would start to clash with some of the core principles of the Christian faith. To summarize it, very, very black and white, in the Oriental philosophy that often accompanies the yoga practices there, you are just part of the oneness, and individuality is almost a temporary thing. It's something that will ultimately disappear when, it's the image of the drop of water that falls in the ocean. And so the future that we're all heading towards is that we will ultimately we will melt away in this, we will become one with the one. The reason that is incompatible with the Christian message, unique in a personal way. We learn this from Jesus, who says, you are children of God, and you may call God Father, and he knows you like a father knows his children, and he loves you like parents love their children. And so for parents, it is very easy to understand that your children are not replaceable. Your children are not a temporary entity that will ultimately revert back to this unity, this oneness. No, you want your children to be unique. They are unique. And even though in many respects children and people are the same and have many of the same behaviors and dispositions and flaws and qualities, we are all still unique. There will never be someone like me, nor has there ever been someone like me. Our greatest fear is the fear of death without retaining that individuality. Our greatest fear for death is not death itself, but it's the senselessness of death, that I disappear and that my life and who I am will not matter anymore. People will forget me. If there was ever built a statue of me, it will ultimately be torn down. Look at the situation in the United States and some other countries right now, where the heroes of the past are now labeled as the abusers, the criminals, and their statues disappear, and everybody wants to forget about them. Well, we are afraid of that. We know how much we're worth. If you love your children, you know how you would give your own life to protect them, how irreplaceable every child is. So even more for God, who loves us like a father, but in a godly way, without all the flaws of human parents. So if we are children of God and God is our Father, then we are just as unique for him and irreplaceable, like children to other parents. So, what makes the message of Christianity so valuable, and I think so worth considering, is that when we die, we don't disappear into nothingness, and our lives will continue to matter, and our individuality will subside. Will continue, because we have a soul that is eternal, and God will, if we want it, grant us eternal life with him. And so forever and ever, I will be me. and there is no end to this. And I'm definitely not called to disappear into nothingness or to become one. It's one of my main criticisms to Philip Pullman's worldview and philosophy, very anti-Catholic, in the Book of Dust and the saga of the Looking Glass, etc. His idea is that Christianity is oppressive and is telling people fairy tales so that they, well, it's kind of the old Marxist criticism, the church is using faith to hide its own crimes and abuse, and the fairy tales prevent people from standing up for themselves. So in the third book, he replaces the Christian view of death and eternity by his own worldview, which is all about, well, exactly this, disappearing into nothingness. The sound that you just heard is someone subscribing to the channel, so thank you so much for joining the YouTube community. Thank you so much. By the way, if you are watching this on YouTube and you haven't followed me yet, then click that follow, subscribe button, and click the like button and the bell button and all the buttons that you can find. So anyway, what I love is, or what I disliked about Philip Pullman's idea is that it is presented as if that is an improvement over the Christian view of death and eternal life. And I was like, I wouldn't trade my faith for anything in the world for that lackluster, you become just this butterfly who falls apart and then disappears like dust in the wind. What good is that? if you are not there to experience it, what's the value of that? It's only loss. So death becomes loss of individuality, loss of what makes your life so special, so personal. We know that one of the things that happens with abusers like Epstein is that they dehumanize the victims. They don't look at people as children of God. They look at at the victims as tools, as objects for their own gratification. So they dehumanize people to use them. They use people and love stuff. That's always the source of sin. Using people and loving stuff instead of doing what we're called to do, and that is use stuff and love people. Or even better, use stuff to help people, to love people. Anyway, so far, so good. Let's move on.
When did you become an expert in thermonuclear astrophysics?
Last night. The packet. The extraction theory papers. Am I the only one who did the reading?
So Jamie says, we are all one, but we are still all unique. That is how I've always viewed what it means to be one in Christ. Yes, definitely. Well, it's like a family. A family can be one, or a country can feel one. We're one country. But it is made out of individual people. That is what makes that belonging together so much better than just, let's just crush, let's take away all the individuality and just create this gooey mass. It's like food. You want it on a plate to have different textures and colors and tastes. And yes, you could put it all in a blender and then let that run for 10 minutes. You'll have the same ingredients, but it won't be edible food anymore. So anyway, maybe that's not the best image, but yes, I like to be an individual. Books. I'm currently listening to an audiobook, which is great. because it's about Star Wars. It's called Why We Love Star Wars, The Great Moments That Built a Galaxy Far, Far Away. It's written by a huge Star Wars fan, Ken Knapsack. He's also the narrator, so he is reading the audiobook. And it is basically a collection of some of his favorite scenes in Star Wars movies, Star Wars books, and Star Wars TV series. Actually, there was a massive spoiler in like the 3rd chapter, and he was talking about Star Wars Rebels. And he's like, what I loved about Star Wars Rebels is that, and it's like, what? Oh, I did not hear that. So I tried to erase it. Normally when I hear a spoiler, I had the same with Game of Thrones when people were spoiling the last season all over the place. And I was like, okay, I'm just not going to focus on it. Yes, I read this, I saw this, but I'm just not going to think about it. And hopefully my hard drive will forget about it. Will erase that information and replace it by something, that is not a spoiler. But yeah, I did not expect that to happen. It is another incentive for me to go and finish watching Star Wars Rebels. I've only seen the first season, and apparently it's very good. So this was a spoiler about the story of the girl that is from Mandalore, I think, or at least she wears that Mandalorian helmet. But it also made me very curious to watch Star Wars Rebels. It was like, wow, okay, that sounds like a pretty good storyline. But I didn't want to hear it. I did not want to know this. Another book that I'm currently listening to that is extremely easy to read and also just well written. I don't know if the story is worth it because I've only listened to the first, 37 minutes, but I'm already hooked, is the book Pandora's Star, written by Peter F. Hamilton. The book was on sale a couple of days ago on the Kindle store, so I got a message from Detlef here in the Netherlands, who is a guy I know from various fantasy events, and we both share a passion for astronomy and that sort of stuff. So he often sends me like tips like this. Oh, you got to check it out. It's the kind of book that I had never heard of. I'm listening to it. It's about Mars, and so there's this crew landing on Mars, and that's all I know. But the way it's written, it's like, oh, I love this. This is just one of those books. It's one of those page turners. It is a very easy read, and so far so good. I'm enjoying this story. I'll let you know what I thought of the entire thing once I finished it. Rebels does get better and better as you watch, Smarty says in the chat room. That's good to hear.
I see aliens. Little aliens from outer space.
And how are things in outer Plutonia?
How many times have I told you not to wear your space boots in the house?
Go the shape I'm in, you can donate my body to science fiction.
Get your suit on! We need ya!
So for today's science fiction segment, I want to do something a little bit different. Normally I talk about a TV series or a book that I've read. But of course, those are not the only media that use science fiction stories. Actually, one of the best media, I think, for science fiction storytelling is video games. And there are a number of games that are quality sci-fi. And I just want to mention a number of my favorite stories so far. Starting with the Fallout saga. Fallout is a game has had many incarnations. It tells the story of a post-nuclear world where people have been living in shelters underground for decades. And once they emerge into the world after most of the radiation, not all, but most of it is gone, they discover that radiation has transformed animals into monsters, and that those people that couldn't make it to the shelters have now created this alternate society, which is in many ways super dangerous and full of, rivaling bands and everything. But the world building in this game is so good, and I'm a huge fan of Fallout 3. Where it also tells part of the story that takes place underground, so before you go outside for the first time. And so you get a taste of what it was to live in this closed world underground, and then you step outside, and the world is literally a wasteland. There's also a first-person shooter version of this, called Fallout 76. That is a game that got a lot of criticism when it first came out because it was full of bugs. It didn't have any storyline to phone home about. Is that a word? Is that an expression? It was nothing interesting. But since the game came out with all the criticism, they've been working quite a bit on trying to make it better. And so from what I've heard, it is already a lot better than it used to be. Another franchise that I think does a terrific job telling a compelling science fiction story and creating a sci-fi world is I'm going to talk first about Black Mesa. Black Mesa is a remake of a game that came out, how many years ago? 20 years? Maybe even longer? Called Half-Life. And back then, Half-Life was revolutionary. It used 3D graphics. You were playing a bit of an adventure game, but the whole concept of the game was so innovative. It was both an adventure and also a shooter game. It had horror elements, and it had an amazing cliffhanger. And the original game, Half-Life, was so beloved that a number of fans have been working on remaking this. And they even got permission, I think, by the original company, Valve, that made the game, to release it. And I've been playing that game on YouTube, at least a few sessions, and it was amazing. It looks fantastic, plays very well, and most of all, the world building is fantastic. I don't know anything about the game. I don't know anything about the plot, but man, do I love it. So that's Half-Life 1, and then Half-Life 2 came out a number of years later, and I've also played that game many years ago, but not having played the first Half-Life, I felt a bit lost, and at one point I got stuck in the game, and I didn't know how to continue. But now I'm playing these games in the right order, so once I finish Black Mesa, I will go and play Half-Life 2. Half-Life 2 also ended with a huge cliffhanger, and was then followed by a number of short episodes, but none of them were real sequels. So you had Half-Life Source and Half-Life 2 Episode 1. What else was there in the Half-Life? Not really sure, but there were a few shorter games, but fans have been clamoring for a true, genuine sequel. And many years, it's like Star Wars, like there should be a new movie, and then you would get these rumors, and they all turned out to be false. Well, ultimately, Valve did deliver, and they made a proper sequel to Half-Life 2 called Half-Life Alyx. And that game is one of the most immersive VR games ever made. It's quite expensive. Right now, it's on sale during the Steam sale, 25% off. So normally I think it's $50. Half-Life Alyx is Valve's return to Half-Life. It's the story of an impossible fight against a vicious alien race known as the Combine, set between the events of Half-Life and Half-Life 2. So actually I was mistaken. This is not Half-Life 3. This is a in-between story. from what I've heard, it is one of the most amazing VR experiences ever. The reason that I'm still hesitating when it comes to buying it is that I do have the Oculus Quest, and yes, you can hook it up to a computer with a cable, and then it would, in theory, also be able to run Half-Life Alyx or Alyx, but I currently don't have a personal computer. I'm using my work computer, my editing computer, for all the streaming. So, but my experience is that games will always go down in price, never go up. They may temporarily go back to the original price, but any scarcity is artificial. And so when there is a sale and they're still making money, even though they do 25% off, then, over time it will be 40% off, 50% off. That's why I'm holding out on so many games, including very cool games. But I'm like, well, I have such a backlog of other games that I enjoy playing. So, why buy it now? I can have patience. Patience. Must have patience. All right, what other cool science fiction games are there? I would love to hear your tips, because I don't have much time to play video games. But oftentimes I was helped by my community telling me which games were worth my time and which ones weren't. Another game that has a VR component, but you can also play it just like that on any computer. It's available, I think, almost on all systems except for mobile, is No Man's Sky. No Man's Sky is a bit of a hunter-gatherer type of game where you just visit planets and then you gather stuff, and with the stuff you upgrade your ship and your... but then they continue to add story elements to it and multiplayer elements, and it's a terrific game. It's not for everyone. I can totally understand that people would not like it, but for me, it's a very relaxing game. I just love just wandering around and flying around. I actually hate it when I'm attacked by pirates, because then all of a sudden I have to get into this, action mode. And if you've ever seen one of my Star Wars Battlefront live streams, you know that I'm really bad at shooting games where too much is happening. So I panic, and I just can't stand it. Oh, there's one more series that I need to mention here, which is kind of dystopian science fiction, but also so atmospheric, and world building is amazing. It's called BioShock. BioShock 1, 2, and BioShock Infinite. All three games are absolutely amazing. There's a bit of horror in it. It takes place in an underwater world, at least the first two chapters of the story. And what I love about it is when you awake in the game, you're almost drowning and you know nothing. And bit by bit, through recordings and little tidbits, you start to learn the backstory, and you realize what has happened to the world that led to the construction of this huge underwater dystopian city. Very atmospheric, amazing game, or amazing games. Slightly more on the just shoot everything that moves is the Borderlands saga. Also takes place in a dystopian post-nuclear war world. A lot of fun, but it's mostly what they call a shooter-looter game. So you shoot everything that moves, and then you loot the corpses for new guns and ammunition and whatnot. But it is very... It's just extremely playable. I just love to run around. Very relaxing. Elite Dangerous is on the total opposite side. It's almost a flight simulator. I have to admit that I've never really played beyond the tutorial. I hear it's very good. Everspace, also a game that I've never really launched. Final Fantasy, I'm not sure if that counts as science fiction. There are definitely some science fiction elements. It's more anime type of stuff. Halo, also available on PC nowadays. Also a great series. Story-wise, not the best, but still serviceable. Anyway, let me know if you have any other tips of PC games, science fiction world building in video games, and I may actually check them out. And of course, you've got all the Star Wars games, but that doesn't count. Star Wars that's a whole other universe. And with that, I think we need to wrap things up because we're at our 1 hour limit. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. And if you're a patron, of course, there is another show for you to look forward to, Father Roderick to the max. And in this week's episode, I'll talk about a huge prank that someone played on me, and I fell for it hard. It was a very elaborate prank. I'll tell you all about it in that episode. Also, again, as I mentioned, a little tutorial on how you can get on my Discord server. That also is for patrons only. I will give you my recipe for spaghetti alla carbonara, a authentic Italian recipe for delicious pasta. I will review Hamilton, the musical, on Disney+. I watched it, and I have some opinions about it. I will also review the comic series Spider-Ham. I'm not kidding you. It's a pig dressed up like Spider-Man. It's called Spider-Ham, and you may have seen him in the Spider-Verse or the multiverse. And I'll continue my series about the altar and the place of the altar in the Catholic liturgy. And I will talk a little bit about TikTok, the advantages, the strengths, but also definitely the risks and the dangers of that social media platform, and maybe, who will take the throne when TikTok gets banned in some countries because of the security issues with it. All right, thank you so much for listening. I'll talk to you guys soon. Have a great day, a great week, and see you next week. That's it. That was the podcast. And I will now quickly go through your comments and see if I can answer some of your questions, because I've not always been paying attention while I was recording. So let's see. I have to say dzień dobry, because we've got some Polish people. Very good. We've got Louisiana, New Jersey. You look a lot like Ed Davey, a British politician. Do I know? I don't even know who that is. Let me Google that guy. Ed Davey. Oh, okay. Yeah, about the same amount of hair, definitely. He's also got a little bit of like a big face. Yeah, a little bit. Oh, well. I'm not a clone, that's for sure. It's a bad year for films. Yeah, a lot of them are going straight to video. Margot says, wealth and power usually do make it possible for people to get away with horrific acts. Just think about how many individual crimes were committed by these people before they were even prosecuted. Yeah, definitely. Sympathizers of monsters like this don't help either. Father, how can anyone attempt to forgive this? Yeah, that may be something that we can't do. However, God's mercy and God's heart is bigger than anyone's heart and anyone's mercy. If there is someone who can save lost people like this, and maybe God, maybe. Prince Andrew. Yes, that's what I meant. Yeah, Prince Andrew. Or like Prince Harry. No, it wasn't Harry. Anywho. Margot says, atrocities are perpetuated by the enablers who fail to hold these monsters to account. Most of these enablers aren't monsters themselves. They're normal and basically decent people. Well, decent, but still their moral compass must be broken. Otherwise, you wouldn't enable crimes like this. Samuel is making tacos while listening. Wow. Now I'm craving tacos. There are also cowards who lack the courage to stand up for what they know is right. May we all be granted the courage to bring justice to the world whenever we encounter it. Yes. Well, that was one of the touching things of the series, of the documentary series about Epstein, was to see the courage of these women. And that was probably the most important message of the series. Ultimately, this is about those women and how, despite what happened to them, they were able to survive, and some of them to grow very strong and to also bond together as victims. That was very moving to see. Marty says, I love your background. You're in the Falcon. Yes, I am. And Dave Filoni directed some of the Avatar episodes. Not everyone knew that, yes. And then I have to watch after The Last Avatar. I need to watch The Legend of Korra, which I don't think I have, but maybe it's on Netflix too. What could be wrong with yoga? Yeah. Well, I hope I've been able to explain it a little bit. So there's nothing wrong with the physical aspects of yoga, mentally, but it's kind of the more religious philosophy behind it. That is not the path that I would recommend Christians to take. Let's see. Confederate generals were traitors to their country for the sole purpose of perpetrating human slavery. Their public lives are shameful and they do not deserve to be celebrated. Yeah, I think I concur. And that is probably why people are tearing down all those statues right now. Usually it's to write home about. Yes. I was thinking of E.T. You guess you read my mind. I was like, there's something about home, message home about, and I'm probably, because I was talking sci-fi, I thought of E.T. E.T. phone home. I should try Titanfall 2 or Mass Effect. Of course, Mass Effect. I've only played the first game. I haven't even finished it. Play Portal. I haven't played that either. Because it's a puzzle game. I'm not very good at puzzle games. Are you at all into a Final Fantasy game? I've played some of them. Played a bit of Final Fantasy 7 and Final Fantasy 15, I think. TikTok is banned in 2 countries, and the US is trying to ban it. Yeah, from what I've heard from app experts, it is riddled with security problems. But TikTok, it's as a concept, is amazing. I mean, it is absolutely fantastic what happens there. It's just such a shame that you can't trust the company behind it. Did you hear the rumor that Disney will erase the Star Wars sequels from canon? Yes, I've heard that rumor, and you know what I think about that rumor? It is absolute ridiculous nonsense. The things that people come up with just because they did not like the sequels. I was like, please. Unrelated question. Are there any specific items you're looking for in Animal Crossing? Yes, I'm looking for the old-fashioned clothes line. I need that old-fashioned clothes line. If you have the recipe for that, pretty please. Is there anything else I'm looking for? Trying to think. There may be some recipes still missing. Well, none are that important. Yeah, the clothesline, that's something I would love to have. I'll let you know. You still haven't visited my island. We should make an appointment, because otherwise I don't think you can just hop onto my island when the gate is open. Will you watch Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness? Yeah, I'll see it. I'll watch it. It would be cool if they bring back Tobey Maguire. I still really like those first two Spider-Man movies. You are the first priest that has been so genuine in admitting that only God could forgive these demons. I certainly know that as a human I can't forgive pedos and rapists. Yeah, well, yes. I think that is why we are not God, right? All right. Oh, and Jamie, you mentioned your request for the address. It is on the Tridio website and also, I think, on the Father Roderick website. Let me see. Here in About Me. Donate. Is it on the donate page? Yes, it's actually on the donate page. fatherroderick.com/donations. The address is under direct transfer via online banking. So if you address it to me and then Stichting Tridio, etc., the Netherlands, that should arrive. You can also go to tridio.com/about. No, not about. Contact. Yes, it's also written on tridio.com/contact. Now, we have moved the offices. That is one of the reasons that I'm sitting here with this green screen in what used to be my living room here. So the address is still formally the official address. I can also send you my private address, so the address where I currently live. Yeah, I can do that too. How do I reach you? Oh, you send an email. I'll email you that address. Because the thing is with the old office address, I don't live there anymore. We don't have offices there. So there's only people in the morning on some. So if it's a package, then often you have to be home to receive it. Now, same problem here. I'm not always home, but there may be a bigger chance if you send it to this address. I'll send it, the address through email. Thank you in advance for sending me that Star Wars stuff. All right, if there are no more questions, then I think I'm going to wrap things up. Disney doesn't know how lightsabers work because not a single part of anyone's body was cut off. I'm not so sure about that. Maybe they want to keep it family friendly, but severed limbs are part of Star Wars storytelling. Okay, Shadows of the Empire, Banjo-Kazooie, and the game on the GameCube, Metroid Prime. Yeah, that was pretty epic. I remember that game. That was always a mark or a cut. Okay. Very well. Thanks for watching, guys and girls, and